Hello, everyone. I'm Luminara Serdar, and I work in the field of autism recovery, helping kids to their bodies to function better so that they can communicate and understand and join us in the life we want them to have. Um, my website is autismtransformed.com, and you can go there and find lots of different information about me, what I do, and look for the recording of this video there. Today, I'm interviewing Dr. Zach Bush, who is a triple board certified physician and formulator and founder of the Restore product. And I'm so excited he's going to talk to us about this today. Dr. Zach Bush started Revolution Health Center 7 years ago. He was in a relentless pursuit to find a better approach to achieving health through nutrition. He's the founder and CEO of Biomic Sciences and discovered the molecule that is Restore. It's the missing link of bacterial communication that's derived from Mother Nature. And the word about Restore is spreading worldwide, and it's an answer to navigating through a toxic environment. Dr. Bush will speak with us more about that. I met him a couple years ago at Autism One conference in Chicago, and I've listened to him speak about the components in Restore and healing the gut lining. So I'm so excited to share this with everyone and to have you on today. So welcome, Dr. Bush.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so if we could start with, so before you came on, I asked the question who had heard of Restore and who hadn't. So we do have people who haven't heard of it, don't know anything about it. So if you can just say, whatever you do so well about the gut and then Restore's interaction with it.
Okay, very good. I think we can start with a little bit of the story behind how it was discovered. I'm always eager to point out the fact that I wasn't smart enough to discover this thing prospectively. I think all the major science breakthroughs that are made in history tend to be major accidents that turn out with happy endings. I did about 10 years of basic science and clinical research between UVA and University of Colorado, the two big universities I trained in over the years. And mistakes and failed experiments happen every single day in the world of science, and most of that comes to nothing. And you just keep repeating until you find a pathway that's working. In this situation, it was the breakthrough was made almost on an intellectual or thought experiment level before we started doing science, and it was just a happy accident in time and space that led to this discovery. But my background research was in cancer cells, tumor cells that grow at the base of the brain in a gland called the pituitary gland, and my little niche was studying the mitochondria that live in tumor cells or any human cell. And those mitochondria look like bacteria. They're tiny little organisms that are non-human, have their own DNA. They replicate inside our cells, irrelevant or independent of the replication cycle of the human cell. And so these little guys live inside of our cells, and their main job is to digest food into usable fuel. And so I had worked a lot on those mitochondria, and then ended up through a lot of circumstances that set up roadblocks to success in the academic setting that was collapsing with the recession. All the funding was drying up for research. So I left UVA in 2010 and started a nutrition center called Revolution Health Center. And we were treating all kinds of patients with all kinds of backgrounds of disease and disorders with very aggressive nutrition programs. And we were increasingly finding that they were not responding like we would hope. It was very difficult to get them to improve, even despite very aggressive nutritional efforts. And there was about half of them that would bounce back appropriately and lose weight and inflammation go down, all kinds of right things. But then there was a good, huge chunk of them that just, no matter how good they got with the nutrition, weren't making progress. And so we started to ask questions about what's happened in the food that we are eating today. Is there something fundamentally different than when all of this science around nutrition and chronic inflammation was started to create in the 70s? And in the next obvious question there is, okay, if there's a problem with the plants, is that because the soil we're growing it in is wrong, is now disturbed or damaged? And that ended up leading to the discovery of Restore. we were going through a white paper, a 90-page white paper on soil science, which I had never read before. I was not a soil scientist at all. I was very much a biology guy in the human realm. And I was flipping pages quickly because I didn't have too much vested interest, and then suddenly flipped a page, and sitting in the middle of that page was a molecule that looked a heck of a lot like the stuff I had been working on with mitochondria, with the exception that it had a big carbon backbone on it. It looked like a much more stable version of the molecules that the mitochondria make. And my first question was, what is that chemotherapy looking stuff doing in the soil? Next question was, how did it get there and what made it? And so after some work, we found that was the bacteria that was making those guys. It turns out that bacteria do not have mitochondria. Any single-celled organism do not have mitochondria. Only the multicellular organisms contain the mitochondria. And so it was not a big intellectual jump to say, oh my gosh, of course, bacteria lacking those mitochondria would have to have an enzyme mechanism of making some sort of oxygen-hydrogen redox or positive charged communication network for their own cellular communication, interspecies communications, etc., that would be responsible for maintaining those and complex ecosystems of the bacteria. The bacteria, remember how complex these ecosystems are. You're looking at 30,000, 40,000 species supposed to be in a human ecosystem. That's an enormous complexity. That's like a coral reef or a rainforest in complexity. So a fascinating thing to realize, wow, we're supposed to have these pristine, complex, communicative ecosystems. And this is part of, I think, why we've become so damaged as a species is we're lacking this ecosystem balance that would lead to that cell-cell communication.
So are you saying that the cells in our ecosystem, in our gut, aren't really communicating?
Yeah, it's a lot like a cellular phone. And so your cell phone has got a very complicated computer in it. And that computer works all the time. You can have a functional cell phone and be driving down the road, and suddenly all drops and you can't get the internet, you have no Wi-Fi, or you have no 4G LTE network, suddenly all communication stops. And it's not because the cell phone itself is damaged. It's not. That cell phone still has all the organisms in it to do it, but it's missing the cellular communication network of that wireless, invisible communication between the cell phone tower and your phone. Same exact thing. We're talking about cell phones or cells of the body, same process. All of the cells of your body have an unbelievable amount of machinery that is sitting there ready to do cell repair, injury detection, all of these mechanisms that are necessary for life. And all of that machinery is sitting there working or ready to work. But if the cell signal goes down or that invisible signal goes down, the cell doesn't even realize there's been an injury, doesn't kick into action to do repair, and the system stagnates and starts to age very rapidly. Rather than doing constant regeneration, rejuvenation, the cell starts to stagnate, starts to accumulate toxins, starts to really accumulate long-term damage. We're in a situation now, 1 in 2 males in the United States are diagnosed with cancer before they die. And that doesn't even count skin cancers. We're talking about solid organ or bloodstream cancers are diagnosed in 50% of males before we die. At that rate, to get a cancer cell to even occur, you have to accumulate somewhere around 20,000 unrepaired DNA injuries in a human cell. That's pretty stunning. And so to get that kind of accumulation of damage without doing the repair, that cellular communication is at an all-time low.
So when you saw this white paper about the soil biology and you saw these kind of chemotherapy-like chemicals, you saw that the soil microorganisms weren't communicating. And are you saying that helps, that somehow diminishes our food? Like, what's the tie with the food and the toxicity, or is the tie like you saw that they're not communicating in the soil, so they're not communicating in us either? I'm a little confused about that. If you could just explain a little bit.
Perfect. Yeah, so the connection is the bacteria themselves. How much ecosystem do you have? each bacterial species makes its own family of these molecules. And so we didn't discover one molecule. We discovered the function of a whole family of molecules. That family of molecules is probably runs in the order of a couple 100,000 to 1,000,000 different variants. And so we're actually calling these things in our lab and in our working group carbon snowflakes. Everybody's pretty familiar with the concept that each snowflake has slightly different crystal structure and beautiful appearance to it. Similarly, each of the carbon molecules made by these bacteria, each species makes its own family that probably holds its own important niche in this vocabulary or communication network of the bacteria. And so the connection that you're asking about is when your ecosystem starts to diminish, when you start to lose biodiversity in the bacterial species that are in your gut or on your skin or otherwise on your body, you start to lose communication. And that's what's been happening for decades and about 4 generations now. In the 1940s was the discovery of penicillin. And very quickly after that, we had to jump into the agricultural industry with herbicides and pesticides that were also functioning like antibiotics or functioning as antibiotics. And so now we're faced with exposure to antibiotics everywhere, in our food, in our doctor's offices, in the air we breathe, especially around farms and things like that. 70% of the rainwater in the United States is contaminated with the chemical from Roundup, glyphosate, which is an antibiotic. So we're surrounded by antibiotic compounds all the time now. And so our ecosystem is dying. It's narrowing down to just the few species that can tolerate this toxic environment. And in losing that ecosystem, we start to really lose that secondary communication network that's made by those bacteria.
So it sounds like these bacteria, okay, if we don't have these 30, 40,000 bacteria in our guts, let's say we have even, I don't know, 500, which seems like a lot, but we're losing communication. So we're basically, that allows us to build up more and more toxins in the body, which means things don't function as well. That's what it sounds like.
Yes. Yeah, you're on it, and so I think the cells of the body are all you're speaking about autism today. The children that are being born today and being faced with this reality of autism, those children, the cells that they have in their body have all the same machinery of cell repair and function that children had in 1975, and yet the rate of autism has gone from 1 in 5,000 in 75 to 1 in 42 currently. So that epidemic is really one that we could boil down to a loss of cell-cell communication. The DNA is very, essentially identical to where it was in 1975. The cellular functions, the enzymes that are there for cell detox and repair are all there, but they're not doing their job. And so that's where the cell-cell communication really comes into play. And that also comes, right into this new discussion that we can move to, if you feel, is that the first structures that start to be damaged by this toxic environment we have are actually extracellular. They're outside the cell. And those are the Velcro-like proteins that we call tight junctions that hold the big macro membranes together in the human body. And those are damaged, it turns out, by glyphosate, Roundup. Also damaged by gluten. We have a journal publication that just came out yesterday in the Journal of Nutrition and Science, and that journal article is showing how gluten from refined wheat products damages this tight junction system, and how if you put back into play the communication network of the bacteria, all of those Velcro-like systems that tie all the cells of the membrane together function so resiliently that they're not damaged by the gluten. So it's a really profound peer-reviewed journal article that really is getting to the heart of what you're asking about here. Is first, we lose our front line of defense by killing the bacteria. By killing the bacteria with the antibiotics, herbicides, pesticides, we start to become weak. Our front line of defense is down, and the tight junction membrane becomes vulnerable to attack. And of course, at the same time of all the antibiotics, we created the perfect toxins for that tight junction membrane, refined gluten and Roundup being a couple of the major ones.
Can I ask a question that someone typed in the chat box here?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so what this person said is, they're a little bit of a biologist, they get it, but what they don't understand about Restore is exactly how it works to promote the growth of beneficial species of the microbiome. If the microbiome is wiped out by glyphosate, how does Restore help us get it back exactly? And how can we be sure the Restore is itself non-toxic and not contaminated? Um, in addition, how exactly does restore tight junctions in the microvilli? So that's a lot. You want me to go back to the first question, or you got
Right?
that?
Questions, but I'm going to start answering those, and then you'll tell me which ones I missed.
Okay.
We'll start with the toxicity because that's where we started. Before I ever put this into my own body, and certainly before I put it into a patient, I wanted to make sure this supplement was going to be safe. The gold standard in the pharmaceutical world for toxicity is what we call renal tubule cell assays. The proximal renal tubule, or the cells in the first section of the kidney tubules, is called the proximal tubule cell. And these renal tubule cells are very much the canary in the coal mine of the human body. So any toxicity that's going to be dangerous to a cell is going to first show up in these proximal tubules. And so we started with the proximal tubule gold standard. A typical pharmaceutical will start hitting toxicity at about 1% concentrations on those cells. We were very short on money at the time because we were a brand new company starting on no money and just a concept. And so we had to kind of go Hail Mary shot. And so we went for 20% concentrations, being pretty sure that we had been able to stabilize a pretty neutral compound. So we went to 20% concentrations of renal tubule cells. Not only was there no toxicity, we actually, for the first time since about 1969, had a compound that was decreasing cell death in proximal renal tubule cells in cultures. So we actually increased the lifespan and life expectancy of those renal tubule cells by 15%. That was pretty unprecedented news. We have subsequently, in further studies, done 50% concentrations, which is far above the toxicity level of water. If you put fresh water on cells at 50% concentration, they die. So we're up at 50% concentrations with no toxicity, and again, extended lifespan of those renal tubule cells. The other system of the body that does a lot of detox and is a common one for us to ask questions about toxicity are obviously the liver cells. And so we've subsequently done the hepatocyte or liver cell studies to prove that there's the same process. There's no increase in apoptosis or cell death with high concentrations of Restore. And likewise, there's a decrease in cell death and an increase in longevity in those cells. So that's the due diligence we've done and the excitement we've had around the non-toxicity of the product. The next question was, how does Restore in this communication network, since it's a sterile product that does bacteria in it, how the heck they come of the ecosystem? And that remained quite a mystery to us for a while. I put this into play in patients that I was not trying to expand their ecosystem very early in our sense. We knew that we were safe, we were having on populations, and so we started putting it into our patients to try to help them out. And long before they were expecting, they were reporting unbelievable results with improvement in their bowel movements, that both in volume as well as regularity. At 50, 60 years of bowel issues, and we didn't know why at the time. We hadn't sorted out all the pieces at that point.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Because you were breaking up, your speech was breaking up. And so I just want to repeat what I heard you say, and hopefully this will not be broken up, is that you started using Restore with people and they started having these amazing results of fully formed bowel movements and more volume, way more than you could have expected when they started using the Restore. And you're speaking to how it can affect the microbiome, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Is my sound, how's my sound there?
It's still breaking up. Still breaking up.
Interesting. Okay. Let's see.
It could be someone it could be that someone on your end also is on the internet and downloading or, doing something bandwidth intensive. It's just
okay. So that's a possibility. Okay. I'll try switching over to a different platform. Are you able to send that Zoom link? Actually, I can send it to
Now you're
myself.
okay. Now you're okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We'll go with this for now then.
Yeah.
So yeah, your summary there was spot on. And so the ecosystem boom that we're seeing is pretty remarkable. We've now, over the years, now 4 years into the science, been able to follow stool studies and people who've had long-standing imbalance in their ecosystem. And the cool story that's unfolding is that many of you on the phone are probably aware of the common diagnosis of candida, which is a yeast overgrowth of small bowel and colon, sometimes in the oral cavity, etc., in the mouth. That yeast imbalance is just one of the many symptoms or signs of a narrow ecosystem. When you lack biodiversity, it tends to be the weeds that crop up. This is very much like going out to your backyard and clear cutting the ground. If you just take a rototiller, cut down all the trees, take a rototiller, just dig up raw soil all over the place, you now have no ecosystem there but the soil. The first things that are going to pop up are the weeds. And the weeds that we see in the gut are Candida, Klebsiella, Pseudomonas, E. coli, many of the bacteria and fungi and yeast that we consider pathogenic. But in fact, they're just the weeds. They're not a disease in and of themselves. And those weeds start to correct the ecosystem. They start putting nutrients back in the soil. And pretty soon you have trees sprouting up and you start getting your ecosystem back. And so if we continue to see people who are stuck with Candida and other elements in their stool that are overrepresented, it really points to the fact that they're constantly doing damage to their own ecosystem. They can't regain that ecodiversity. When you put this restore back into the gut, everything changes. And that's because there's two functions of restore. Number one is to do the communication network we were just speaking of, to help balance between one species and another what they're doing in regard to proliferation, cell repair, all of these things. The other function of it is compost. And so think of your organic garden where you're composting your food scraps down and you've got this rich compost, and you put that into some relatively dead soil and grow some seeds and they thrive. Restore is very much, by definition of what it is, which is broken down food particles into these tiny little carbon metabolites from the bacteria. That is the cellular or microscopic compost of your gut environment. And so the first step is get cell-cell communication so that if there's an undergrown species that needs to proliferate, it can send out signal that's heard by the other species and say, oh, I need room in the ecosystem. I need to get a foothold here. So you do cell-cell communication and you give that healthy soil back so that the bacteria can start to proliferate and thrive and have a food substrate to grow in. So first you need the cell-cell communication in the ecosystem, then you need the healthy soil, and then the crops start coming in and you start to get that ecodiversity back.
Great. And then how does that play into the tight junctions in the microvilli and helping with repairing those?
Awesome. Yeah, so the body is always trying to repair these membranes and produce new membrane. So your gut turns over every 3 days completely. So your gut lining with all the villi, which are finger-like projections that stick out from your intestinal lining, those villi are coated with billions and billions and billions of microscopic cells that are tied together with Velcro-like proteins, which are the tight junctions. And so your gut's turning over on a daily, every 3-day basis, 100% of those cells turn over and have to make new tight junctions to tie to the next cell adjacent to it. And so that cohesive membrane that's turning over all the time is in a constant healing or regenerative process just in a normal day-to-day life. You now take away the bacteria from that membrane or reduce that front line of defense of the bacteria, that membrane now becomes more vulnerable to toxin. And the most common toxin, again, in our environment is glyphosate, or the active ingredient Roundup, and that has a direct toxicity to the Velcro. What we're showing is that when you put Restore back on those membranes, even before they're shown a toxin, they start making more tight junctions. They make 30 to 40%, sometimes as much as 100% more tight junctions, and that continues to increase over about a 6-day period. And so we can start to show increased tight junction function within 3 to 4 minutes and then they continue to get more and more dramatic over the next 6 days. And so the tight junctions are starting to get tighter and tighter and tighter. And so all Restore has done is provide the normal bacterial feedback to that gut membrane for cell-cell communication. Restore doesn't fix the tight junctions. Restore doesn't fix anything. All it's doing is accelerating the rate of the communication of those normal cellular structures and functions to build back their normal day-to-day function, which is basically a regenerative process all the time in the healthy biology.
Okay, so basically I'm hearing, because there was a little bit of a, I'll try and make this as smooth so we don't have any interruptions in your speech, is that the Restore gives the molecules to give that better communication. And when you have that better communication, it's basically like your cell phone network is back and working, and the cells can communicate, and they're always repairing themselves. So it's really a process of self-healing that's speeded along by the fact that you've got communication going. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, that's really it. You got it there.
Excellent. I had a question from someone who I don't think is on the line. This is from Angela. She asked if Restore would be beneficial for people who are using digestive enzymes like Trienza from Houston Enzymes. Like, how is it different, or would it eventually replace that type of, the digestive enzyme part of things?
Yeah, up until Restore, the clinical tools that I had as a doctor to reach for when we were talking about gut health were digestive enzymes and probiotics. Both of these, as a physician, we kind of knew were far short of a solution. They were tools that we were employing. We didn't know, what the results would really be. We have no clinical trials really showing any benefit to long-term probiotics. There's a couple of very small trials that are looking at very specific outcomes in very small populations or conditions that show short-term benefit to a few probiotics, but by and large, we have very little data that these tools that we're reaching for all the time are even working in our body. Digestive enzymes are made by bacteria, by glands in your body, in your mouth, in your digestive tract, including things like your salivary glands, the lining of your stomach, the pancreas, the gallbladder, liver system. These digestive enzymes are being made by lots of different environments. But the vast majority of the digestion and enzymatic work done in the human body is not done by a human cell. 90% of it, 90% of all of that digestive work is done by bacteria instead of digestive enzymes. And so while digestive enzymes may give some short-term relief, if in fact it has in your life, then I don't see any harm in continuing that short term. But really the way to fix the issue of digestion is get your bacterial ecosystem up and booming. And so ultimately we expect that if you can get your ecosystem really booming and balanced, you are going to be able to see the use, or at least the daily use, of those digestive enzymes.
Do you have any studies, or have you done any investigation into if someone uses Restore for X amount of time, they find they don't need the digestive enzymes?
Clinically, what we do in my clinic is generally I stop all digestive enzymes and probiotics on day one, and I've been doing that for 3 years, and I haven't seen any problems doing that clinically. I only see short and long-term benefit. Some of my patients, really feel that the probiotics are beneficial, or they love their digestive enzymes, so they'll stay on them, and I don't feel strongly enough to tell them they need to stop it. But by and large, I'm used to just stopping those products, understanding that I'd rather have a balanced ecosystem doing that work instead of the artificial environment of a probiotic, which is 3 species that have 35 billion copies that shouldn't even be necessarily represented in the human gut. 99% of the probiotics on the market are bacteria that are cultured out of cow intestine rather than human intestines. And they don't have the ability to set up colonization and live in your gut like human bacteria would. And that instead they pass through the gut on a daily basis, affecting some of the ecobalance within the intestines. But for those reasons, A, they're from a cow, and B, they can't set up shop in your gut, and C, there's such a narrow spectrum of 3 species instead of 30,000 species. I don't think there's a huge benefit to long-term use. But if my patients are exposed to antibiotics or chemotherapy or some other noxious thing, such as a viral gastroenteritis, they may do some short-term digestive enzymes, probiotics, to kind of help them bounce back from some of those symptoms. But in the long run, if you're talking about really in an optimal ecosystem, optimal bowel function, you don't want to be micromanaging it and dumbing down the system with just a few species of bacteria or a few types of digestive enzymes, when really you should have thousands of metabolic pathways available to your food, not just a few.
What about fermented foods? What would you, I mean, because they're not from a cow and, you know, you're fermenting them yourself. So what about this?
Yes, I'm a huge fan of the wild fermented food. So yogurt is a good example of a probiotic food. That doesn't have any ecodiversity. Yogurt is usually one strain of your lactobacilli in there, or one of those. So you'll have one species of bacteria introduced to your milk culture, and that turns into yogurt. That's not anything different than a very simple probiotic that is not going to diversify your bowel flora. In contrast, your wild fermented foods that are done in your home, where you cover the crock of salt water and your chopped up turnips or whatever you're making, you put that wild fermentation into play, and you'll get hundreds and hundreds of species introduced from the air into that substrate. And so that's really where the wild ferments really probably win the game. And they've been in our diets for thousands of years, really up until the 1940s and 50s, when we started to use widespread refrigeration. We started to dumb down our diet and get some of these wild fermented foods out of our daily experience. And I think we've suffered for that.
Wow, thank you. So I'm going to read a few questions here from the chat box, or I'll read the next one. My son is autistic, almost 4 years old, and from his test results, he has candida and yeast overgrowth. Now he's taking probiotics. Could you please explain more how Restore will work for young children with autism and yeast overgrowth? Wait, I lost my place. A yeast overgrowth and candida issue. And does it have any side effect on them? And what do you think about treating the yeast overgrowth for a young child with autism with antifungal medicine like fluconazole? Okay, that's a lot of questions.
Let's see.
You got that? You want me to repeat anything?
Yeah, why don't you start back at the beginning of that, because I lost my train of thought about halfway through on the beginning of the question. Let me see if I can start at the beginning and work through that one.
Sure. So how Restore will work for a young child with autism and candida issue, if it has any kind of side effect in any way.
Okay. All right. Let me start at that beginning. So first thing to do is just define what autism is, which I think, you know, the whole system of Western medicine is very much struggling to understand what autism is, how does it occur, what are the biologic underpinnings of the disorder that we see so rampant in our children now. Our group is really narrowing this down from our own biased perspective of the gut, but I think we're pretty accurate right now. There's a lot of data suggesting that breakdown in this front line of defense of the tight junctions and an overwhelm to the immune system, the gut lining, is really the beginning of much of the underpinnings of the syndrome. And so an autistic child, by definition, is really going to be manifesting everything that I've talked about so far that we're all facing, but maybe times 10 or times 100. And so those children with autism are really functioning as our canary in the coal mine as a species, saying, wow, we have too much toxicity in our environment and we've lost our front line of defense. Our bodies are turning into sponges for toxin rather than toxin clearing devices. And so a child with autism is stuck in a biologic process of absorbing toxins and unable to get toxins out of the neurons and other immune tissues in the body. And so that autistic child is going to have some predictable effects when you start to put into play a bacterial communication network. And it's not always a linear, happy story. I mean, it's not always just easy. These children often are very sensitive to the changes in the bacterial ecosystem because their overgrowth in the small intestine is so severe. Their ecosystem is so very narrow by the time they're starting to really be understood to be autistic, or starting to find treatments for or supplements for their condition, whether in the pharmaceutical environment or in the dietary supplement realm.
And so these children are very, very sensitive to change of anything, and that's, their sensory processing deficits are just an aspect of that difficulty with change, or the challenge of dealing with change of any type. And so when you start using Restore, or really any other compound that has a lot of biologic activity, you're going to want to go very slow in that population. And we learned this in part from our autism group, and in part from our Lyme disease population that have often show up in our clinic, having been exposed to years, if not decades, of antibiotics from their physicians trying to treat Lyme disease. Those are very similar populations. The autistic and the chronic Lyme patient with 10 years of antibiotics, those are going to be equally super sensitive to change in the ecosystem. It's always beneficial change in the end, but they can have some side effects that are predictable. When you have a really leaky gut, when you have a lot of gut permeability, you get dehydrated inside the cells. You can't traffic water from the colon into the bloodstream to the cells, across the cell membrane into the cell, where the water is supposed to hydrate the cell. Hydration and water is really the key to being a solvent cleanser. There's no other solvent on earth that works better than water. There's no chemical solvent, there's no soap, there's nothing that works as good as water at acting as a solvent, especially in biologic systems. And so as the dehydration occurs in the child's brain or other tissues, they start to accumulate toxin. They can't get the toxin ejected from the cells through the normal hydration mechanisms, etc. When you suddenly put into play a correction of that tight junction membrane by getting the normal body's repair capacity back in that membrane, once the body starts repairing tight junctions, expressing tight junctions again, you're going to start to see a very rapid shift of water across the colon. That can leave the individual with some constipation because you just sucked all the water out of the colon trying to get the body finally rehydrated again. That effect is pretty short-lived. It might only last a couple weeks or something, and your treatment for that is simply water. You just drink more water, get more water consumption, which, as many of you parents know with autism, can be quite challenging. A lot of kids have a lot of water aversion. And so we use herbal teas, we use lemon water, whatever you have found is working for your child is more palatable. If they do have a water phobia, getting that back into the system. It's one of the unique things about Restore. If you put a couple drops of that into water, it actually makes the water function more biologically favorable. And so your autistic community may actually drink more water if you just put a couple drops of the Restore into the water. And that's how we generally start. Instead of doing a teaspoon of it or something like that, just a few drops under the tongue, or a few drops into the glass of water or juice, and that's a good place to start for your autism community. Over time, then, you're going to see a correction of the ecosystem. To answer the rest of this individual's question, they then were asking about yeast elements and things like that. And we kind of already talked about this, but to sum that back up, as the ecosystem of the bacteria expands and becomes more complex, it's going to do its own work to help reduce the burden of yeast back to its normal biologic function. I really believe yeast is supposed to be in the body. It's just supposed to be there in very small quantities. It's supposed to help detox chemicals, supposed to help with little niche elements of metabolism and things like that. So the ecosystem is then going to do the work. Restore, again, is never treating anything. It's not treating anything in the gut, the bacteria, the human cells. It's simply that invisible communication network that's getting cell-cell communication running and letting the innate system take back over.
And then the last bit of that question was what you thought about treating yeast overgrowth with something like fluconazole or some kind of antifungal.
I think that's chasing the wind. I have, a lot of patients. I just saw one a couple of days ago that was a perfect example of this. She's 21 years old. She was born with severe cerebral palsy, neurologic injury at birth. She was in the intensive care unit, neonatal intensive care unit for the first couple months of her life. She's had chronic candida overgrowth since birth. Every single stool study that's been done for the last decade shows 4+ yeast elements in her stool. Just classic. She has been through many cycles of antifungals, the fluconazole type drugs. She's been through many cycles and endless amounts of probiotics. She's been on digestive enzymes. Nothing has touched that yeast growth. Started her on Restore in December of 2015, just about 9 months ago. First stool study was done 4 months later, about 3.5 months later. And that stool study, the very first one following the use of Restore for 3.5 months, showed 0 yeast elements for the first time in 10 years. And so that, again, it's not an antifungal. It's not killing the candida. They had tried to kill the candida all the time, but that's not going to work because it's a weed. A weed is always going to thrive in an adverse environment. And the more antibiotics, antifungals you throw into the gut, the more adverse it gets. And so it's total chasing your tail by putting people on antifungals. And so we've got a new approach, which is get that kiddo on that fermented food. Very, very important to acidify the gut. A lot of children with autism, I think, suffer from what used to be a geriatric or old person condition, which is not enough acid production in the stomach. And so I often use hydrochloric acid as a supplement, HCl. You can get that in any health food store, and a tablet or a capsule of HCl with the meals. You don't want that before the meal. You want them to already have had a couple bites of food and then take that tablet. I use that as an adjunct to the Restore supplementation if I have something that's stubborn. But we've seen some of the most stubborn cases correct themselves when they give themselves that cellular communication back and let the system take care of itself for the first time in these young lives.
Excellent. Thank you. We have some more questions. How long to use Restore to get some kind of balance in the gut? And we're talking specifically with autism here because this is our audience we're speaking to. Maybe you can just speak to your experience around that.
Sure. So I've been treating, the first autistic kiddo that I started treating was about 2013. I was treating a small number of kids that I already had in my clinic with autism. In 2014, let's see, I'm losing track of my years, it was 2015. In June, we went global with the introduction of the autism community through Autism One in Chicago. And so since June of 2015, we've had a whole lot more experience. We've been working closely with Thinking Moms Revolution and their 40,000 families of autism that are in that network. So we have autistic families now across the globe, many in Australia, lots in Europe, the United States. So we've got hundreds and hundreds of families that have not only been on the product for more than a year now, have given us a lot of feedback. The feedback is extremely humbling. It's always a little overwhelming when you spend 20 exhausting years of your life through medical education and subspecialization and research, and you're really in pursuit as a doctor of some sort of ability to help people. And it was a very depressing career for the first 15 years of that before I started doing nutrition science and practice. It was so frustrating seeing my patients get worse, not better. And what a reversal of things that have happened in these last couple of years in my medical practice. It brings me to tears on a daily basis, just getting hugs from clients and patients and parents of patients and everything else. It's emotionally overwhelming to see and find out that the human body can heal. And nowhere is that perhaps more emotional and overwhelming than in the autistic community, where the challenge of being an autistic parent can never be calculated. For those of us that don't have autistic children, when we watch what you guys get through in a day, it's so humbling, and I'm constantly embarrassed by my own shortcomings as a parent and my own lack of coping mechanisms and patience that I wish I had more of. My children are now 18 and 16, so I've got a pretty easy go of it these days. They're pretty autonomous, both in college and doing well. But I just am humbled by my journey as a parent and the shortcomings I saw in myself, and to see the adversity and challenges that you guys face with an autistic child just can't be calculated. And it's been an extremely humbling journey to find out that Restore is going to be a part of your journey or your child's journey, and the journey of your whole family as you're doing what you're doing. Clinically, what we see is almost unbelievably, the first effects we see is in the neurology. We have a lot of data coming out of UCLA and UCSD, UC San Diego there, as to probably why this is happening. But those universities are showing that there are neural dendrites, these little neural projections that are coming out of your gut lining and hanging out right with bacteria without a membrane between them. And so that's a pretty stunning new finding, that your nervous system, your brain is reaching right out into that compost and complex bacterial ecosystem for information and nutrients. And so that's probably why we're seeing such rapid changes in the brain, not just in autistic people, but also just, the day-to-day people that start taking Restore who don't have autism. One of the first things they mention is better concentration, better sleep quality, their brain fog seems to lift, all this stuff. And that's not because the Restore is doing it, it's because their brain is simply getting more nutrient and less inflammation, and they're doing their own healing process there centrally. So we start just a few drops, typically in an autistic child, 3 to 5 drops in water or juice or under the tongue. And if you have a breastfeeding child still who's under the age of 2 and still breastfeeding or something like that, just a couple of drops of Restore onto the mother's nipple before breastfeeding is another delivery system that seems to be pretty successful in these children. But just those few drops, and you start kiddos on this, and so many times now we've seen children go from a nonverbal state where they have monosyllable grunts and tones that they do, to suddenly just in a few days starting to be able to speak words, and then in a couple of weeks being able to string together their first sentences. Within a month or 3, they're starting to sing complex Disney songs with their favorite lyrics, and it's truly stunning and overwhelming to see that these children, and what a burst of hope to realize these children that seem so affected and have tried everything under the sun without much effect, and some things that have had an effect. A lot of you are using the GAPS diet, I'm sure, and nutritional interventions and fermented foods, and a lot of you have seen progress. But to really see that progress accelerate is daunting and overwhelming as a physician, to think, oh my gosh, we're just at the very tip of understanding how these children are going to heal completely. And I just have to be convinced. I have to hold out hope that if I was able to stumble into something this big with a little $10,000 lab in rural Virginia, working out of a plumbing building that we converted, my gosh, we have million-dollar, multi-billion-dollar labs all over the world. When we put our mind to the right questions, we're going to find bigger answers to these problems that these children face. So I have a lot of hope for the future.
Excellent. Thank you. We have a few more questions. I'll try and combine them if I can. Any contraindications once your gut is balanced? Can you stop taking Restore? Is there a sign that it's time to stop? Or the same person asked, is eating dirt, do you get the same effect?
Excellent. So does dirt have the same effect? We mentioned this earlier. When we started to realize that we needed a complex family of these carbon molecules, we knew we were going to have to go after some population of soil that had this huge eco-diversity in it. And very quickly we realized that probably was not going to be a piece of topsoil in your backyard or my backyard. The soil that we have currently on the surface of the earth is highly contaminated with Roundup from the rainwater, lots of herbicide and pesticide residues from spraying in the air, lots of antibiotics dumped into the soils. Our water system is contaminated with pharmaceutical drugs, everything from birth control pills to estrogen, progesterone, hormone therapy for women, to the Zocor kind of cholesterol drugs. These are present in all of the municipal water systems now. And so if you go and say, I'm going to just go eat dirt, keep in mind that dirt doesn't have the ecosystem diversity they had 60 million years ago, and it's probably relatively contaminated compared to water just 20 years ago, let alone 60 million years ago. So we decided we were really going to have to go back in time to find kind of biodiversity that we knew we were going to probably need to get a fluent vocabulary down there at the biologic level. So I think I know we have a much different result by using the fossil soils than we do the dirt. Second piece of that question is, or the second part of the answer to that question is that even the raw materials that we're pulling out of the soil from 60 million years ago don't do anything. They don't have any biological effect. The biome that we can measure doesn't change tight junction function. It doesn't do any of this biologic effect that we're seeing this communication network do. And that comes down to my work with the mitochondria again. Once we found the carbon molecules that we wanted, we needed to do what the mitochondria do, which is get this really eloquent balance between oxygen and hydrogen binding right. And so that's what we do with our raw materials. We bring them all to our labs here in Virginia, and we go through a process of getting that oxygen hydrogen binding correct so that the toxicity goes away and the biologic function arrives. And we think that we're now, have this supplement that is really mimicking the real-time biology of what these carbon molecules were doing as they came out of the bacteria and fungi that were in those ecosystems 60 million years ago. So that's a two-part answer, I think, to that question. You're going to now have to remind me of the other question, if that don't mind.
Yeah, and once you feel like you're pretty balanced in your gut, do you stop using Restore? What's the indication for that?
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. And that was my hope and remains my hope, that we're going to start to figure out nutrition to the point where, and we're going to stop using antibiotics in our environment to the point where we can recover an ecosystem that's balanced. But to date, despite all the science that we keep doing, both from a nutrition standpoint as well with Restore and everything else we're doing, we have not yet found a point where people are steady state. Our patients who have been on the product for a year and a half to 2 years, those patients will often recommend they discontinue the product just to see where they're at with their own gut function. And they usually hold their own for about a month. And then within 4 to 6 weeks, they're seeing the irritable bowel syndrome come back, brain fog coming back, and some of them will notice it within a day of stopping the product. In our autistic community, we have found that we're so far from getting a totally balanced ecosystem that at a year and a half, 2 years, we're nowhere near. We haven't even reached, normal goals, let alone a point where they're able to be autonomous. So, unfortunately, our environment is so abnormal and so adverse in the chemical environment as well as lack of bacterial diversity that we're finding the need. I think, especially in the autism community, I think you would be expecting to use this product for the foreseeable future until we really make dramatic changes in our farming practices and in our food chain.
Thank you. Any thoughts about making this, applying this as a nasal spray?
No, not only a thought, it's actually almost on the market here. We actually thought we were going to be able to launch that in June, but some regulatory things came up with FDA regulations and things like that, so it's taken us a little longer. But we should have that available online on the Restore for Life website within the next 3 to 4 weeks. You can order those. They work very nice delivery system that we've worked on for almost a year and a half. It took us quite a while to find a nasal spray device that was delivering a fine enough mist at the volumes that we needed. So we did our due diligence on the mechanism of delivery, and now we're really thrilled with the device we have. We love the product that's rolling out. So Restore nasal sinus wash or Restore sinus spray is the name that's there. That's the FDA's liking. So it's the sinus spray version of Restore that should be hitting shelves in the retail environment in the next 3 to 4 months, but you should start to see that on the website within the next 3 to 4 weeks.
And would that be helpful for, I'm thinking with parents with kids with the, brain issues and brain not communicating, brain inflammation, would that be a better delivery system for the brain stuff, or is it mostly just for sinuses?
Both. So, the blood-brain barrier is really runs throughout the whole body. It's almost a theoretical shield more than something you can put your finger on. But every capillary that abuts a neuron, so every time you have a peripheral nerve out in your arm and in your fingertips, or centrally when the blood is delivered to your brain directly, every single capillary that abuts a neural structure is going to have a super tight junction system. So about 6 times or 9 times as many tight junctions as you would see in the gut lining. And so those super tight junction systems are also weakened by the same mechanisms, the gluten injuries, the glyphosate injuries, all of that. And so what we're seeing is that, the higher the concentration you can get there, probably the faster you're going to get some change there. But as I mentioned earlier, the dendrites, or there's neurons that are actually projecting right into your gut. So I don't think you have to spray it up your nose to get to the blood-brain barrier. Because of the results we're seeing with oral use in autism, we know the blood-brain barrier is affected directly by those bacteria and everything else in the gut very quickly. The advantage of the nasal preparation is really as an add-on to oral, and the reason is that your gut lining actually starts at your nose. The tight junctions that tie together your sinuses are the exact same tight junctions that do the rest of the gut. So when we talk about gut health, we're talking nose to rectum. And a lot of the yeast elements and a lot of the really nasty bugs that are going to be populating the autistic child's gut are bred in the anaerobic environments, which would include some of the sinuses that have very low oxygenation, especially under chronic inflammation states. And so those can be breeding grounds for a lot of the unwanted weeds and bacteria and fungi that are then swallowed through the postnasal drainage all night long in that autistic child. And so it's something that we're excited to deliver, because we're going to think, or we're expecting to see, on the global scale, what we've already seen in our initial efforts with it, is that when you start adding that nasal product, you get an additive benefit to the oral usage.
That's great. Thank you. And one last question, which is when I see a lot of kids in my practice, I see they're really loaded with toxins, heavy metals, and it sounds like when you have this better cell-to-cell communication, you're going to have a better ability to detoxify. But in your practice, or what you see with the TACA moms, or the other autism organizations that are using Restore, do you see that they're still do they need still to do some detox? And of course, everyone needs to have nutritious food, but I'm curious if you still see people need the additional heavy metal detoxification type, cilantro, chlorella, these types of things.
I love using them. So, any superfood that you might be using in your practice, we use a ton of curcumin and turmeric for their anti-inflammatory properties. But yes, absolutely, the parsley, the cilantros, we love all of these elements of the diet. We think there's probably a million reasons that we don't even understand yet as to why it's important to go beyond just the tight junction and bacteria to really get a lot of these unique micronutrients into play. Certainly, they would help diversify the bacterial flora that you have, as well as deliver a lot of these unique antibacterial, anti-inflammatory kind of superfoods that are there. So keeping that food as rich and diverse is really critical. That's kind of rough news to deliver to an autistic family that's trying to feed a kid who's got one of the most narrow palates known to man. Autistic children tend to have a very narrow palate as to what they can even put in their mouth, or what they tolerate putting in their mouth. And unfortunately, that's typically going to be refined carbohydrates as their preferred mechanism. So I watched so many families go through heroic efforts to get the GAPS diet really diversified and getting healthy food in their kiddos and everything else. And so I realized there's some understandable limitations, and I never want my patients or their families to beat themselves up if they feel like, am I doing my child a disservice by my inability to get too much, restores a nice adjunct, and get some of the easier to tolerate GAPS elements, whether it's the bone broths or whatever it is that you're doing that the kid does tolerate. If that's all you can get in for a period of time, celebrate that. Don't feel guilty if you're not getting the rest in there. But we love the superfoods as they get added in, for sure. One of the issues with the Restore and the superfood that I should probably mention is that your child's ability to absorb nutrients is very perturbed. If you have an autistic child, you're used to seeing those dark circles under the eyes. You're looking at a malnourished kind of body, despite all of your best efforts with the nutrition. And that's because once they develop that leak, once the tight junction system is really damaged and their biome is unbalanced and they've got all this mess going on in the gut, and that huge immune system that sits behind that gut lining, which is called the GALT, gastrointestinal associated lymphatic tissue. That GALT represents 60, 70, sometimes 80% of your immune system. And that's getting overwhelmed by everything that's flowing through that unfiltered milieu with the damaged gut lining. What then results is acid. And so inflammation that goes to try to attack all those things that are moving through that leaky membrane produces an acid type environment, and that acidic environment makes it very difficult to get some of these critical micronutrients that you're talking about in this cilantro and other things to move across that gut membrane effectively into the bloodstream and deliver to its target tissue. And so the exciting thing is that after 3 months, 6 months, we see not only those dark circles going away under the eyes, we see growth spurt happening. So we have a lot of children in my clinic. As an endocrinologist, for many reasons, I see growth retardation, people with primary endocrine or hormone disorders who can't grow, etc. You start feeding those bodies through a healthy membrane again, and they'll start growing naturally. Their growth is stunted because their brain is sensing a lack of nutrients, and so they're trying to slow growth so that the demand for nutrients doesn't go up. You start really delivering nutrients effectively, that body's going to go back into a more normal growth phase within months.
Wow, thank you. That's amazing. One last question. I know a lot of parents have done enemas for their kids. A lot of kids are constipated. Have you ever used Restore in an enema?
Daily. Yeah, I use it in almost all of my cancer patients and things like that. We're using enemas all the time. So an enema is an easy way to get very high volumes of it into the colon. The colon has some unique properties to it that are much different than the small intestine. So we do use it that direction. In general, the only autistic kiddos that tend to be getting the enemas are the infants and the really young kids that are under 2 years of age, because usually by the time they're 2, they're tolerating oral use very effectively. The autistic community generally needs so little of this compound that it's pretty easy to deliver it orally, and you don't need to go to an enema approach. But if for some reason you are delivering supplements or therapies rectally in your child, then Restore is certainly to use that through that mechanism to get a teaspoon to a couple tablespoons of volume into the body.
Great. Can I know we can go to restoreforlife.com, restore the number 4 life.com to get more information, to order, to find out where people can buy it. And do you have, how much to use in an enema there, or is that just what you said, just a teaspoon to 3 tablespoons? How much would you use?
Yep. So I recommend when you go on the website or you order the product, go to the website and download the PDF that's all over the website that's called the usage instructions. And it'll go into 4-page detail from me on, if you've got a sensitive kiddo, this is how you use the product over time. We talk about use of oral magnesium as being important, especially in constipation, variant IBS or autism. So if you have a kiddo that's autistic, we have a regimen with that. I recommend clinically to all of my patients, whether they have autism or not. If they have chronic bowel features, we always do a parasite regimen, and that's mentioned in the usage guidelines. So I would highly recommend you go there and get that whole PDF. We'll cover 4 pages of written material. But in general, if you have an autistic kiddo of any age, whether a few 9 months old or 18 months old, all the way up to your adult autistic community, I would start them at 3 drops, just tiny doses, 3 drops in the water or the juice under the tongue. Do that daily for a week or 2, and then double the dose to 3 drops twice a day or 6 drops in the morning, and then slowly work up over the course of a couple months to a teaspoon 3 times a day being your target. If there's still irritable bowel stuff going on and you want to continue to push for microbiome diversification, then you could go up to a tablespoon 3 times a day, something like that.
Great. I so appreciate you've been a wealth of information. Thank you so much for explaining this for everyone listening. And yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing product. So thank you.
Well, delighted for everybody on the phone. I just have such respect for all of you who are either working with the autistic community as a therapist or a practitioner, or for all of you who have an autistic child. My hat's off to you. I just have such enormous respect for what you guys do every day, including your incredible effort to find information on your own terms and really pursue health for your child when you're told that health is not possible. I am just amazed by the diligence and brilliance of this autistic family community and the parents here, and a huge respect for all of you.
Thank you.